Welcome to today's Explainer. We are diving into a fascinating challenge in healthcare education, transforming traditional simulation into a genuinely powerful tool for next-generation NCLEX or NGN success. I'm incredibly excited to unpack this with you because we're looking at a literal blueprint for building safer, more decisive healthcare professionals, taking the purely theoretical and making it highly practical with a brilliant mock code escape room. Let's kick things off with a number that honestly stops you in your tracks. 50%. According to the data, half of all novice nurses are involved in a patient care error. Just pause and think about that for a second. These are professionals fresh out of school, stepping onto the floor with the absolute best intentions, yet half will be involved in an error. That statistic alone highlights why the conversation around nursing education is just so urgent right now. And it actually gets a bit deeper when we look at the root cause. 65% of those novice nurse errors stem directly from poor decision-making. It's not a lack of caring, and it's certainly not a lack of textbook memorization. It's real-time clinical judgment failing under pressure. Because of this, a mere 20% of employers are currently satisfied with the clinical judgment of their new graduates. We're facing a massive, massive gap between passing an exam and actually being ready for the unpredictable nature of patient care. So to tackle this gap, our explainer today is hitting 4 main areas: the clinical judgment crisis, decoding the NCJMM framework, 5 simulation strategies, and finally, the mock code escape room. Starting with part 1, the clinical judgment crisis, and exactly why NGN matters now. Since we know there's this massive gap between education and safe, on-the-floor decision-making, the next-generation NCLEX standards are absolutely vital. It's not just about tweaking a test, it's about fundamentally shifting how we evaluate someone's ability to think critically when it matters most. But what are we actually aiming for here? Well, the National Council of State Boards of Nursing defines clinical judgment as an iterative process. It's about using nursing knowledge to observe and assess presenting situations, identify a prioritized client concern, and generate the best evidence-based practice solutions. Basically, it's the observed outcome of critical thinking. It is constant, it's ongoing, and it is entirely focused on safe client care. Moving on to part 2, decoding the NCJMM framework, or demystifying the flowchart. Okay, if we're going to teach clinical judgment, we need a standardized way to measure it, right? Now, the NCSBN's resulting flowchart might look incredibly dense at first glance, flowing all the way from client needs down to clinical decisions. It's designed to close that gap between education and examination. But for our purposes today as educators and facilitators, let's just draw our attention to the middle and bottom sections of this model, Layer 3 and Layer 4, because honestly, that is where the magic happens. Let's pull Layer 3 out and look at it closely. This layer outlines 6 linear cognitive steps every single nurse has to take to make a sound clinical decision. Step 1, recognize cues. What info is relevant right now? 2, analyze cues. Why is this subset of cues actually concerning? 3, prioritize hypotheses. Which explanation is the most likely or the most serious? 4, generate solutions. What interventions achieve desirable outcomes? 5, take actions. Which intervention is most appropriate right this second? And finally, 6, evaluate outcomes. Were the interventions even effective? This is the actual thought process a nurse uses at the bedside, running in a continuous, high-stakes, cognitive loop. Now, let's drop down to Layer 4 and see how this builds. Layer 4 recognizes a fundamental truth. Those 6 cognitive skills we just went over, they do not happen in a vacuum. A nurse is constantly battling external and internal forces. On one side, we have environmental factors, things like time pressure, task complexity, cultural considerations, and available resources. On the other side, we have individual factors, the nurse's own knowledge, skills, and prior experience. A simulation that doesn't account for both of these layers is just not fully preparing a student for reality. Which brings us to part 3. 5 strategies for simulation, moving from theory to practice. It's one thing to stare at a flowchart, but it's an entirely different beast to build an educational curriculum around it. So here is your roadmap. Strategy 1, actively map your learning objectives to the 6 cognitive skills of Layer 3 during your planning phase. Strategy 2, assign your student simulation roles based on those same 6 skills. Strategies 3 and 4 involve creating targeted observer worksheets for both Layer 3 cognitive skills and Layer 4 environmental and individual factors. And finally, Strategy 5. Use the entire COGMM framework to structure your active learning debriefs. I really want to pause on Strategies 3 and 4 for a second, because this is a real game changer for keeping the whole class engaged. For students who aren't currently hands-on with the patient mannequin during a sim, give them targeted observer worksheets. Have one student strictly evaluate their peers based on layer 3. Did they actually recognize the cues? Have another student observe layer 4. How did the team handle the time pressure? This perfectly turns passive watching into active, framework-driven analysis.
All right, part 4, the mock code escape room. Let's put this into action.
To brilliantly illustrate how all of these strategies and frameworks come together, let's look at a totally fascinating case study. By combining the natural pulse-pounding pressure of a timed escape room with clinical simulation, educators can force students to exercise their cognitive skills under highly realistic stressors. Think about it. An escape room naturally introduces time pressure and task complexity, not to mention the sheer adrenaline rush of watching a clock tick down. It's essentially the ultimate test of clinical judgment, just disguised as a gamified challenge. But hey, safety is paramount. Always. Before the activity even starts, strict ground rules are set for teams of undergraduate health students. Electricity is real, guys, so there are 0 clues hidden in electrical outlets. Furthermore, if students need to defibrillate the patient, they have to verbally tell everyone to stand clear and visually confirm nobody is touching the patient. Also, the room isn't actually locked, and nobody should be climbing on furniture. Setting these parameters ensures the stress remains completely cognitive, not physical. Once the clock starts, the simulation follows a super precise faculty flowchart. And if you notice the design, layer 3 is mapped directly onto the activity. Recognize cues, analyze cues, prioritize hypothesis. The students have to find clue cards, solve locked manila envelopes by figuring out patient ID bands, and piece together sequential steps that will ultimately lead them to recognize the cues of a non-responsive patient and initiate care. And the design of the puzzles themselves literally forces clinical thinking. Students have to analyze unexpected cues, like for instance, a deck of playing cards where some cards are different or unexpected. They have to map the shapes on clue cards to these playing cards, order them sequentially, and use that data to unlock combination locks. It teaches them that out on the floor, data rarely presents itself neatly in a bow. You have to recognize it, synthesize it, and unlock the next step in patient care. And check out how this builds to the final climax. After successfully navigating the room, finding the QR code, and realizing they're actually allowed to use their cell phones, the final action requires them to recall their basic life support training. They must generate a solution to the non-responsive patient, perform 2 minutes of high-quality CPR, and successfully resuscitate the patient to truly escape the room. But you know, the learning doesn't just magically stop when the timer buzzes. Ultimately, the observed outcome of critical thinking and decision-making is the delivery of safe client care. So the escape room is followed by an active debriefing session. The entire debrief connects the students' chaotic, high-adrenaline experience right back to the structured NCJMM framework, proving that engaging practice directly leads to safer patient outcomes. Which brings us to our final provocative thought. Are your simulation labs ready to build the next generation of decisive, NGN-ready nurses? We started this explainer looking at a staggering 50% error rate among novices, but by blending rigorous NCSM theory with dynamic, engaging simulations like the mock code escape room, you absolutely have the power to reverse those alarming statistics. So my question to you is, how will you use these tools to transform your next simulation? Thanks so much for learning with us today.